So, Professor, to start off, just want to thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. So, to get into the subject of alternative energy, to just get through the basics, understand a little bit more about it, could you just give a little introduction of yourself, what you teach at the university, some of the things that you work on as a professor, and just give a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jacob Weger. I'm a lecturer in environmental studies. It's my third year now at Seton Hall, and I teach a wide range of courses in environmental studies, including intro course and a number of various electives. But my own specialization, well, I'm an anthropologist by training, so actually my focus is really in kind of human environment in relationships and environmental politics and things like that. Really, my background is more on kind of adaptation to climate change, so understanding the processes and politics shaping how people are responding to climate change in that way. But I do teach a wide variety of environmental themed classes, and so alternative energy is certainly something that comes up.
Absolutely. So, kind of going on that, within the context of your own experience and talking about the adaptability for climate change, how would you yourself define alternative energy and, in your opinion, the importance of alternative energy in relation to what you're looking into?
Yeah. So alternative energy is energy that serves as a substitute for fossil fuel-based energies and usually has lower environmental impacts. This includes things like wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, biomass, and even emerging technologies like hydrogen fuel cells. Historically, alternative energy was more focused on energies that were sort of outside the mainstream, but more recently, as renewables have become much more popular, much more cost effective, they're being more integrated into kind of global energy systems, so they're becoming much more mainstream themselves. Although I would also emphasize that, from my own perspective, especially when thinking about energy and energy systems, it's important to keep in mind that this is not solely about technology, technological developments, but it's also really about rethinking our relationship to energy, production and consumption, and thinking about how we can move towards more sustainable and equitable systems of energy production, distribution, and use.
Absolutely, thank you. And so, a lot of people, of course, now are more and more understanding the importance of alternative energy, and they're starting to more understand the role it has to play in order for us to live a more sustainable lifestyle. And of course, a lot of people are kind of seeing it as one of the prime ways in which people can go towards that goal of trying to create a more sustainable future. Thinking about adaptability, in your own eyes, what breakthroughs do you think would need to occur within our current infrastructural systems that we currently have, our battery storage and our renewable grid? What kind of roadblocks do you see there in what we currently have,
Yeah.
and what we would need to update in order to get towards something a little bit better?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, I make a slight distinction that when I talk about adaptation to climate change, usually this refers to kind of really responding to the direct impacts of a changing climate. So sort of weather extremes, rising sea levels, things like that. Whereas when we're talking about alternative energy, it usually follows under the umbrella of what's termed climate change mitigation, right? So it's the goal there is to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere so we can slow down or even halt the progress of global warming. But of course, these two things are not completely separate, and more the idea is to look for sort of co-benefits. So mitigation actions also contribute to increasing people's resilience to climate impacts and vice versa, right? So like adaptation actions also are going to be sustainable and in a way that is reducing our greenhouse gas production. But certainly, as you bring up, like there are challenges in the infrastructure, in particular things like wind and solar. The energy from those it's only available intermittently, right? We can harness the power of the wind when it's windy out. We can harness the power of the sun when it's sunny out. So the real challenge there is devising better battery storage and sort of improved grid technology. I am not a specialist in sort of these technological developments. I'm aware there's a lot of really interesting innovations occurring right now in sort of energy storage, including things like gravity powered energy storage systems. There's something referred to that's like rock weathering. There's some really interesting kind of innovations, but that's certainly where a lot of that development needs to go, as well as decentralized energy production. If we decentralize that production, we can actually make renewable energy more reliable and efficient, and also more able to respond to kind of local community needs and prioritize, again, this issue of accessibility and equity as well.
Well, to continue on that, within being in New Jersey and what is currently centralized in Jersey, a lot of our current power that we're using now is coming from traditional nuclear power. And of course, one of the topics that are coming up is what role could, say, nuclear fusion play as opposed to nuclear fission systems. And of course, because nuclear is largely that traditional energy that a lot of people are trying to pull away from, without getting too much into the technical details and kind of going into that decentralization of energy, in your opinion, what role do you think that new types of nuclear power could have in trying to mitigate the problems we have?
I mean, I think they're definitely worth pursuing. I think nuclear fusion technology still is somewhat on the horizons. We haven't really figured out how to harness that yet. And I think it's definitely worth pursuing, right? But in terms of the current nuclear technology, it is in some ways quote unquote green because it does not contribute to greenhouse gases in a large way. It does have some sort of localized environmental impacts on local water systems and local ecosystems, these things. But the biggest challenge, or the biggest sort of issue with nuclear fission is just that it's incredibly risky, right? There's a lot of risk attached to it, not just what were to happen in terms of a shutdown or kind of a localized disaster that disrupts the plant itself, but thinking about long-term storage of nuclear waste. This is something that we're just burying it deep underground and putting it off for generations, many generations down the road to figure out how to deal with it. We haven't actually solved that problem. I think that investing in technological research and development such as nuclear is hugely important, but I think that it can't be the only answer. I think that relying too much on technology to fix the problems that have been, frankly, created by technological development is ignoring the more systemic aspects of the problem. And what we really do need to be trying to transition to is changing our relationship to energy production, consumption, to energy distribution, relying more on the immediate sources of energy that we do have available, that are safe and trustable. That's what I would say about that.
Absolutely. And to build off of that, changing our relationship with energy, without necessarily getting into the details of the specifics of emerging technologies, but related to exactly what you think would be the best solution and having localized energy that does change the way we currently stand. Are there any particular new technologies that are emerging that catch your eye of interest as perhaps being able to fit into what you think is the right plan of action?
Well, I mean, I think solar and wind they're not even emerging anymore, but they're becoming so cost effective. They're actually among the cheapest energy sources globally now. So they're becoming way more accessible. Of course, we have to have policies in place that actually support the integration of these technologies, rather than pulling investment out of those technologies like we're seeing right now at the federal level. These technologies are immediately going to lead to job growth through things like solar panel installation, infrastructure development. There's all kinds of jobs for electricians and engineers and construction and in that. But I do think that trying to move towards more localized energy systems will enable us to devise energy usage that can better adapt to present circumstances, and also can empower local communities to actually have control over that, reducing energy poverty in certain places, and also enhancing or increasing resilience of communities in the process. So this is, we need to think, in thinking about changing our relationship to energy in this way, we also need to think sort of beyond the national context, right? Realize that that there's, in terms of equity and access, there's always a risk that wealthier nations and large corporations, if energy remains so centralized, they're going to dominate this transition to clean energy, leaving many marginalized communities behind. And so I do think we need to shift away from continuing to subsidize fossil fuels, invest much more in infrastructure development, in technology, but do so towards the long view. The long view of trying to actually move away from excess energy production and consumption, move away from highly centralized energy production and consumption to more local, decentralized systems.
Absolutely. And going off of that, do you think in making those transitions and trying to avoid some of those inequalities that are a concern, what role do you think government has to play in trying to get that executed?
I think government, again, can provide subsidies in that direction, right? And shift subsidies away from fossil fuels, right? Basically, right now, we are on the fast track to crossing this 1.5 degree threshold, and soon the 2 degree threshold, and that represents 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The scientists have said that is what we have to limit ourselves to if we want to avoid catastrophic global warming. They say 2 degrees Celsius is already going to be somewhat catastrophic. 1.5 is going to be extreme, but we need to rein it in at that. We have basically 5 years left of our carbon budget. If we continue putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we only have 5 years in which we can bring that to a complete halt. That's a complete halt, right? And so if that trajectory is going to be extended longer, well, then we absolutely need to bend that curve as soon as possible. And that's going to require moving away from fossil fuels with a quickness, right? And investing government grants, tax breaks, tax deductions, subsidies, investment in R&D, sort of university, sort of basic research grants as well. And this needs to occur both in sort of the engineering and hard sciences, but also really in the social sciences and political science, and thinking about ways, again, to bring communities into the picture.
And I want to touch upon what you said regarding those deadlines and a lot of those real but catastrophic predictions about what could happen if these changes are not made. There are a lot of people that believe that the problem is simply too big to solve, and there's almost a bit of hopelessness regarding that, especially as far as public opinion is concerned. What are your thoughts on those who might think that the problem is simply hopeless?
It's certainly complex, right? It's been described as a wicked problem because it's so complex. But history shows that societies can undergo massive transformations when faced with urgent necessity. The real key is political will, it's investment, it's thinking about systemic change. And part of this comes from technological advancements, like we've seen these rapid advancements in renewable energy technology and electric vehicles, in energy efficiency. And these things all seemed impossible just a couple decades ago, right? And now they've become cost competitive with fossil fuels. So I push back against the idea that it is either impossible or purely a technical challenge, right? I think the biggest hurdles, the biggest barriers to change are often social, economic, political, right? We need to find ways to generate the political will, facilitate, to kind of figure out like ways to facilitate the economics of the transition. And anytime we frame the issue as simply too big to solve or impossible to solve, then we're it's fatalism. We're giving into or risking inaction. But if we recognize that the challenge is immense, it's complex, right? But every step moves us closer to a solution. Whether that's, again, shifting subsidies from fossil fuels, investing more in energy storage and distribution, expanding community-based solar programs, or strengthening international climate agreements, right? So a lot of my work is around environmental governance, and one of the key lessons here is that you need to have governance across multiple scales, right? We cannot just defer to the federal government or just to state governments, for example, right? But we need to be working across scales, across levels of governance, frankly, I think that there needs to be a change to the international climate policy making framework right now. The last few decades, 30 plus years, we've relied on these annual COP conferences, the Conference of the Parties, COPs, but they have not yet been able to achieve anything with real traction. Right in 2015, all the signatories to these international this international framework, they signed the Paris Climate Accords, which set these goals, right? 2 degrees Celsius, but try to keep things within 1.5 degrees Celsius, reach net zero by 2030. Again, that's only 5 years from now. But as we've seen, government after government basically blows that off and blows right through their commitments because there's not any kind of real sort of enforcement mechanism or commitment with teeth. Now, there is no world government. I'm not proposing that we have some kind of world government that comes in and actually is able to enforce what countries do, but there are international mechanisms that help to coerce countries to do this. And we see the best example of this is the Montreal Protocol, which went into effect in 1989 and very successfully phased out the use of CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, which had been creating a hole in the ozone layer. So in the 80s, people weren't quite talking about climate change yet, but everyone was worried about the hole in the ozone layer. And if you lived in the southern hemisphere, people were getting high rates of skin cancer. But the international community came together. And they banned these substances, and the ozone is well on its way to healing itself. All right? So, of course, the planet has this healing capacity, right? But it's only going to do that if we allow it to.
And touching on that, the progress in some areas, like the response to the ozone versus the seeming inactivity of other areas of government, even within the same communities of government over these years, seeing these different meetings and how some are maybe better than others. Do you see the response to both the climate crisis and using alternative energy as a mitigation for it? Do you see it in one place or the other within, say, the next 2 decades from now, or is it too close to call?
I mean, I think that in the next couple of decades, alternative energy is not going to be so alternative anymore. I think it is going to be the way forward. Again, not just because we have to, and many, many countries and communities are realizing this and are committed to that, but also because it's becoming cost competitive. And so I think that as there are more and more advances in things like energy storage, and decentralized energy production, and these things we've talked about, it's likely to make renewables ever more reliable and increasingly efficient. And so with that, we're going to see major shifts in transportation networks. Probably we'll have more investment in high-speed rail. Probably electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles will become dominant rather than the minority on the road. But again, I would just always come back to question about whether this transition can remain equitable. It's always important to think about who controls and benefits from these systems, because there are many communities in the world that have historically borne the brunt of environmental harm, whether from pollution, often related to energy production, from climate change, or even lack of access to things like energy. So we need to find ways to also prioritize them in the next couple of decades as well.
Understood. Professor, I think we're at time, and I think that kind of wraps up all of our questions. So thank you so much. This is extremely helpful, and we really appreciate all your insights on this important topic.
Great, thank you. I've enjoyed it.